Hi, my name is Schaefer, and today I'm going to show you how to remove and install a passenger side CV axle in a Toyota Camry, and this is going to range from early 90s all the way up to the 2000s. The setup I have going here is we're going to be disconnecting the rear motor mount, and you don't need to do this, but I'm supporting it from the top with a crane. There's always hooks on these Camrys. You can just hook it on the engine, and that'll support the engine while that rear motor mount's disconnected. However, you can use a floor jack around the oil pan, and I didn't do that just so I could show you guys and have enough room in there. Now the problem with these Camrys is that on the passenger side CV axle there's a mid-shaft bearing, and the CV shaft passes through the motor mount. That's where that bearing sits. On all the ones I've worked on, it's impossible to get that bearing out of this motor mount while it's still in the car. So what we're going to do is there's three 14mm nuts that hold on the motor mount right here, here, and here, that hold the motor mount to the frame, and then there's four 14mm bolts that hold the motor mount to the engine. What we're going to do is we're going to remove all those, and because we're not going to be able to lift up the motor high enough to clear these studs coming off of here, we're going to end up cutting this old CV shaft with either a cut wheel or a sawzall, whatever you can do. We're going to cut it here, and then we can remove this whole half of the CV axle going towards the outside of the car. And then we'll be able to just pull this straight out of the transmission, whatever's left over from the CV axle. You're going to need some hammers and some basic hand tools. First thing we're going to do is you're going to need to remove the cotter pin and this castle lock nut. You're going to use an impact wrench with a 30mm socket. After that, we're going to have to remove the tie rod end. It's going to take a 17mm socket, and you're also going to have to remove the cotter pin from there. I already did that. It's going to remove this castle nut. You can use this tie rod end separator, where you just fork it in there and just pound it loose. So that's loose there, or you can hammer it from the bottom with the nut on, but you might damage the threads on there. There's two 17mm nuts and one 17mm bolt that hold on the bottom half of the lower ball joint to the lower control arm. Once you loosen those three up and take them off, take a big bar, go in, grab the lower control arm, press that down, and that'll separate this whole unit from the lower control arm. You may need to pop this end of the CV axle with a punch or a socket extension, and now loosen this up. Once that breaks free, now we have everything loose from there, and we're going to be removing this. And now we're going to start that cut on that CV axle pretty close to the transmission. Now that we got that shaft cut, we can get the whole motor mount and what's left of the CV shaft out. You're going to have to do a lot of positioning to get it out of here, and if you need to make another cut, feel free to, because your shaft is already junked. What you may need to do to get the whole axle assembly out with the motor mount is you're going to have to give this a good yank, and that should pull the boot right apart. There you go. And now you should have room in there to pull the rest of it down. Alright, now that we got the motor mount and the mid-shaft bearing out, this is the only part that really gives problems. So what we're going to do is we're going to put on some safety glasses and gloves, clean up, and we're going to be hammering this out this way. Made sure this retaining clip was loose and that bottom 14mm nut was out. So we're going to hammer out what's left of the half shaft and the mid-shaft bearing out of this motor mount. If you want, you can go purchase a new motor mount. That's up to you, or you can work on cleaning this one up. We'll just take a few hits, a little sister sledge, and see how she does. There we go. Got that released. Usually that takes a lot more work to get that out of there. We're going to get the motor mount all bolted back up to the engine with the soft mount that goes to the frame, and this will be the back half of the engine here. We're going to take the half shaft from the outside, fish it through the motor mount, and once we get that set, we're going to take vice grips and we're going to clamp it around this part of the half shaft. And this is right where it enters to the differential of the transmission. What we can do is we can tap those vice grips, and that will help set this bearing into the chase of this motor mount. Then we'll clip everything back together. We reinstalled the motor mount to the back of the engine and to the frame. We're going to take our new CV shaft and feed it through the motor mount. Got it started from here. I'm going to go underneath. I'm going to take a pair of vice grips, go around the shaft, and I'm going to start tapping. And I'll take this off and show you where I was catching on that old half where I cut off. I'm taking these, clamping onto there, and I'm tapping it with the hammer right here, and that's seating this into the differential of the back half of the transmission. Before you do this though, always check the rubber seal, the differential seal, make sure everything's in good condition. This is the new half shaft going through the motor mount, and earlier, after I got this in here, you couldn't see this from where I was from the other vantage point, but I put that vice grips around here, and it was catching this shoulder right up in here, and I was hitting it with the hammer to seat it into the differential of the transmission. And as you're hitting that, it'll bring this bearing further and further over into the motor mount. After that's completely set, you can take that retaining clip, slide it over here, and you'll see there's two little channels that'll lock in there, and then you can tighten down this retaining nut. Installation for the rest of it is the reverse of the disassembly, and I want to stress that this is what you have to do if you run into a difficult situation where you can't release this midshaft bearing from this motor mount while it's still in the vehicle. If you can, loosen the retaining nut, take off that clip, and if you can hammer the old half shaft out of the motor mount with it being in the vehicle still, do that first, because you're going to save yourself a lot of work. This is just what you have to do if you run into problems.